Hi there and welcome to the Labyrinth. Today in this particular video we're going to be talking about healing with light, more specifically coloured light, which is also known as radiant light therapy. So within this context it's actually pretty important to differentiate between colour therapy and light therapy, because although there's some crossover, there are some differences. Colour therapy primarily occurs in different ways that can be used as a tool for at least psycho-emotional diagnosis and treatment options, and we discuss this in the healing videos that I've created on the channel as well around colour therapy and around Carl Jung and his interpretations of colour. So in this particular video we're going to be talking about how we can use coloured light. We're going to look at how it's evolved over history to its current form, and where it has been used historically, and why at different times it's been referred to as a pseudoscience, particularly in the 20th century, and where we place it now in the 21st century as far as being a credible healing tool, despite the fact that it's not actually recommended as a therapy or treatment by modern health practitioners, be they mental health or physical health practitioners. You know, let's take a look and see what relevance there is to it now by looking at, as I say, how it has evolved over the ages. So within the modern context of the 21st century, when we talk about light therapy, we're talking about chromotherapy. I will be coming back to the subject of chromotherapy and going into it in more detail towards the end of the video. But for now, it's got relevance because when we talk about light therapy, we're talking about this use of radiant colour, and this involves the use of shining light, sunlight it could be, or it could be artificial light, through a coloured glass for specific healing purposes. And historically, when Dinshah, who is the creator of this whole modality, if you like, he believed that by using this radiant coloured light you could heal both physiological and psychological health conditions. When he first created it, he called it Spectochrome, and throughout the 20th century, as I'm aware of it, it's always been considered a bit of a new age thing. It was a hocus pocus. It was referred to as being pseudoscience, but I think it's important to unpack it, right? Which is why we're going to look at the history of the actual thinking and how it evolved and how it got to the stage where Dinshah made these coloured lenses. So on this image here, we've got a photo of him and we've got a photo of the types of slides that he originally created way back at the beginning of the 20th century. And we'll look at how did he come to the conclusions that he did. You know, was there any substance of this idea of using coloured light to heal? So let's start at the beginning, shall we? So I would imagine that when we talk about the idea of healing with light and sunlight, most people are going to connect the dots and go, okay, it was the Egyptians. They must be the first ones because we all know that they were sun worshippers. So it stands to reason that they would be the original light colour therapists or whatever. And to some extent, we do know this is true, by the way. People may not be aware that, while they're aware that the Egyptians were sun worshippers, they may not be aware that the Egyptians did use colour as part of therapy, because there's been papyrus records that provide information around colour cures, and they are believed to have been written in about 1550 BC. Now, according to the ancient Egyptian mythology, which I find rather funny, they believed, or they claimed, that they got the idea of colour healing from the god Thoth, if we can say that with a lisp. The thing that differentiates them to today is that they only used primary colours. For example, this is what we know. They only used the primary colours of red, blue and yellow, and they were unaware that you could mix up, colours to make more than one. And they believe that by shining the rays of the sun through these coloured crystals, a yellow crystal or a red crystal, that it could penetrate the body in specific locations and heal physical ailments. So as the colour is, or as we know, colour is just light of varying wavelengths, and it's got its own frequency. So they were very much ahead of their time. But once again, we're talking about colour therapy, where it's recorded and known to be about 1550 BC. However, it's important to acknowledge that, it may have happened earlier than that. We don't know because we don't have the evidence, but we do know that they were actually considered to be sun worshippers and using sunlight up to at least 2500 BC. And we know this because they built temples that were dedicated entirely to healing through light, and they had different rooms dedicated to different healing powers with different colours. And so I think the question is, were they really the first to use radiant light therapy though? That would be a good question. And from my position, I think it is a good question, because if we look at what was happening in England and in 2500 BC, we know that Stonehenge was carefully designed to align with the movements of the sun. So there's a level of sun worship that's happening there. Now, these enormous stones and the smaller blue stones reportedly were set up as I say, about 2500 BC, and they are arranged to frame two particular events in the year, which is the sunrise at summer solstice and the sunset at the winter solstice. Now, obviously, we can't be sure when we look at these things because there's no evidence to support that they were using colour at that point in time, but it certainly appears that they had the sunlight, radiant light, played a focal place in their belief system. Now, I just want to make the point too that the photo here I've obtained off the internet, and I've put the copyright content up there because I really don't want to be done for copyright infringements. So for a long time we can actually see, when we look at the science of archaeology and that kind of thing, that obviously Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids were considered to be the oldest features on the planet, so to speak. However, more recent studies and if I can say the words, archaeological digs have identified that New Grange actually is much older than both of them. New Grange is a mound that's in Ireland, and where they've been able to dig it out, and it's been established, which I find fascinating. So we're deviating a little here from the whole idea of colour and light therapy, but I think it stands to reason. I've put these photos up, once again sourced and with the copyright information up there, to show what the mound looks like from the outside. And of course we've got in here an Irish tomb, or the way they use sunlight for whatever it was that they were doing. Now, what is really interesting here with this Irish mound is that they managed to get DNA from what they believe to be a king whose remains were found within the mound. And it is from these remains, if you like, they were able to get the DNA and establish that he lived around 3200 BC. And this has been this is the way they managed to put a time frame on the construction of this particular mound. So we now know that the mound was created 3200 BC at least, and that they were also sun worshippers. Now, the other interesting fact of this DNA was it identified that this Irish king that was within the mound was actually a pharaoh, much like the Egyptian ones. They can check the DNA and this kind of thing. He also, if people aren't aware, the Egyptian pharaohs were generally products of incest. They were brother-sister relationships, or mother-son relationships, and father-daughter. A bit distasteful, more than a bit distasteful actually. But in the day, apparently this was considered to keep this king line pure. Obviously led to a lot of genetic issues, let's be real. Now, just for a little bit of trivia here, something that I found really fascinating when I was looking at this particular mound, and I want to make clear the reason I'm not talking about the other mounds that are throughout the world is because from what we can tell from the other mounds, there's no evidence to suggest that sun worship was part of that lifestyle, although frankly I believe that it would be, but there's no evidence to support that. The other mounds, from what I can gather around the world that have where there've been digs, has shown that they are focused on the stars. So it was about astronomy with the other mounds. But what we can gather apparently from the DNA, because it wasn't just the king that was in this mound, there were actually bone remnants of other people that lived over the years there. And what they managed to establish is that the original Irish people actually weren't white. They were considered to have, as I say, this bloodline of the Egyptian pharaohs, and they were able to tell that as they travelled, it took about 100 years from their homeland, travelling from the homeland through to Ireland, where they set up a life basically as hunter and gatherers. But along the way, obviously because it took 100 years to get to Ireland, approximately, you can do your own research on this, they also had mixings with Spain, if you like, so there's some Spanish DNA in there, and then they're able to tell from the DNA fragments that within Ireland it was originally settled by this nomadic mob that got there, became hunter-gatherers. Then about 1,000 years later there was a Turkish invasion which brought with it farming and agriculture, and that actually changed the quality of life for the local Irish. And from there you obviously had the Roman invasions and Viking invasions at later dates. So obviously as the Irish have evolved, their skin has become lighter. So this might explain why people have referred to the Black Irish. My own father, just for the record, if people are interested, he used to be referred to as the Black Irish here in Australia, even though he was about 4 or 5 generations at the time. To some extent, I think within the course of this video that it's actually important to make this connection and link back to the Egyptians because of the cultural differences for the Irish people to some of the other Western cultures. And this is because within the Irish culture, they have their own myths, and it's well known that the Irish folk used to travel from Ireland to parts of what we now consider to be the UK, be it Wales or Scotland or whatever. There's always been people traversing back and forth between countries, so there will be a shared level of culture there as well. But from a cultural perspective, with the Irish, if anybody is aware of this, they have their own myths and beliefs, especially those that include fairies, the little folk, the leprechauns, the belief in the rainbow bridge. If you think about, the leprechaun and the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, things like this. This is part of their traditions, spirit and angels, fairy realm, all of this stuff. And there is a belief associated within the Irish folk that a person must be able to cross the rainbow bridge to be able to connect with the divine. So when we're talking about this, when you talk about the rainbow bridge, I think that it raises a few questions, which aren't really that implausible. As a standalone, though, if people were to sit there and think, rainbow bridge, like, what are they talking about? The rainbow bridge, of course, has the rainbow colours in it, which are 7 colours. Now, this photo here actually doesn't do it justice, or the image of the rainbow justice. It's just one that I was able to source off the internet. But what we're talking about is with the rainbow and the rainbow bridge that we have clearly defined colours of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, like the sky, indigo and violet. And this, I believe, is where it really starts to get interesting around colour and radiant light. And this is because we've just discussed on the previous slide that the Egyptians did do colour healing, but we only have evidence that they used the primary colours. We don't have evidence, certainly within the modern context, that they used the colours of the rainbow. But what happens is, my logic runs to, well, hang on a moment. If we've got a pharaoh that was in Ireland in 3200 BC and he's got Egyptian links, of course it stands to reason. If you've got this rainbow myth over in Ireland, then it is most likely that they brought that with them from Egypt, the whole concept of the 7 coloured rays. Now, if we jump ahead a little bit, the next real evidence or information that we have around colour healing or radiant healing light, actually happens with the Vedic texts, okay? Now, these are considered to be ancient Indian scriptures, and they refer to the use of colour therapy. As I say, They are believed to have been recorded somewhere between 1500 and 500 BC. And when we talk about their use of colour therapy and shining light through crystals, the same as the Egyptians, they perceived that it wasn't, or in their scriptures, it's not just written down as combining the colours, but there was also other relevant factors such as salt, taste, basically, and whether food was salty, sour, pungent, or astringent. The ancient Indian civilizations believed that you could use colours to penetrate the body at a deep level and remove blockages to internal energy centers, which of course we know today to be chakras. But where I'm going with this is they believe that you could actually do physical healing as well through sending light to the chakras. Now, the interesting thing is that also within these texts, the Vedas prescribe that the person worship the sun by facing east at the time of sunrise, because the sun was very important to them, and having the sun rays fall directly on the chest was said to be highly beneficial for good health. And the morning rays apparently were supposed to be more beneficial than at any other time of the day. Now, in these texts as well, they specifically refer to 22 diseases which can be cured by the rays of the rising sun. Quite fascinating. I'm just giving you a little bit of background here, which is that some of the ailments that are actually listed in these tests include, well, allegedly, I can't read them because it's not my language, but allegedly include things like headache, earache, anemia, diseases of the head, deafness and blindness, and all sorts of body pain and body stiffness. They even mention, allegedly, I say, jaundice and diseases of the stomach, and that there can be poisoning occur. Yeah, look, I'm going to step away from that, okay, as far as what these cures allegedly could do. But because what I think to be more important with the text is that they say that living in the rays of the sun is akin to living in the world of an elixir, and that they can prolong the life of an individual. They also write in these scriptures, apparently, that the sun marches from the sky, and we're talking about 1500 to 500 BC, that the sun marches across the sky from east to west, and his chariot by which the sun is carried is pulled by 7 horses. Now, with respect, if people have had much interaction with Indian writers, they are actually quite poetic as they write, and the interpretation of these horses is that they are the 7 coloured rays, which is why I've put these here on this image. We've got the sunlight, we've got the chakras, and we have the 7 rays, 7 colours. And I think the importance of bringing this up here is to say, look how far back this goes. Before technology, these people had determined and been able to establish that there were 7 coloured rays, the 7 that we see here. And we know, and we'll be discussing this in the future rays, that future slides on this video, that there is a colour spectrum, and it does evidentially, based on modern research and research along the way, that we have 7 colours in the light spectrum. Furthermore, modern studies actually show that yes, that sunlight is, or what we call visible light, is made up of this rainbow of colours, and that light travels in waves that are too small for our eyes to see, and that colours like red, orange and yellow, they travel in what is referred to be longer waves. They are not as potent or as strong as the other colours like blue, indigo and violet, because they have shorter waves and they are said to carry more energy. So of course, when I'm talking about this little bit of wavelength and this kind of thing, that's modern information. That's not yesteryear. This is what science has shown today. And they actually believe that when light is moving through the atmosphere, some of the waves become scattered, and this is what gives the sky its colour. So that's modern science for you. I've created this slide simply as an informational resource for you on what is believed to be the healing properties of colour for the body based on the Vedas. But please pay attention, there's no clinical evidence to support physical healing with colour, and I'm going to make a personal disclaimer here saying that my approach to colour healing for the physical is to incorporate the colours with whatever medical treatment I may be receiving. So I wouldn't be encouraging people to disregard mainstream medical treatment for any health condition. I certainly don't think there's any harm in incorporating colour into the process though. But this is a slide purely for your information. So while there's not really a contribution to light therapy from Pythagoras, I think it's important speaking about him and his contributions anyway, because he did develop a theory of vision that was similar apparently to Plato, but his theory is actually proven to be incorrect. And what we do know is that yes, he did use stone, crystal, selves, dyes and paints, but it's believed that his theory of colour was restricted to these ones here, which might be why we've all jumped to the conclusion, before evidence shows us differently, that the Egyptians only used certain primary colours as well. But I think it's important to say what he did get wrong, he and his colleagues, were that they believed that colour was something that humans produced through their eyeballs. So it was, we would take in the sunlight and it was our eyes that actually created the sense of colour. I guess probably the biggest contribution as far as colour therapy goes with Pythagoras and the Greeks was that they're the ones that actually related colours to the four elements of water, air, earth and fire. So in regard to colour or radiant light therapy, the next person that I think really needs to be acknowledged is actually, and I apologise for mispronunciations, I pronounce it Avicenna, that may be wrong, but I've written up the gentleman's real name there so that people can pronounce it themselves. Now, Avicenna was a preeminent philosopher and physician of the Muslim world, and he flourished during the Islamic Golden Age, and he's said to have served in the courts of various Iranian rulers. He is considered, even in the Western world, so just in case people are bringing their religious bias to this video, he was believed, and is still believed, to have been the father of early modern medicine. And he's said to have been influenced by Aristotle and Pythagoras and Plato. I'm not 100% sure about that. I really can't speak to that. It just sounds a little absurd to me. But either way, in his Canon of Medicine, he wrote that colour is an observable symptom of disease. So we're talking about physiological health conditions, and that he related colour to temperature and the physical condition of the body. Now, as I say, for a long time, he was the primary influence. What I find interesting, and I've developed a new video, there's another video, and the link will be in the description of this one, is Paracelsus. Okay, Paracelsus was also very influential, if I can speak, influential on medicine to this day. And Paracelsus actually was a real rebel, and it's actually recorded that as he progressed, the Paracelsus threw the Canon of Medicine onto a bonfire, which shocked his peers at the time and the medical professions, because they felt that it was completely disrespectful or whatever. But what I find interesting is that although Paracelsus became very, very negatively critical about Avicenna, Paracelsus actually adopted colour therapy into his own medical practice, and he was the one, and it stands up today, to make links between colours of food and physical health and well-being. As I say, you can find a link to the video, his video, in the description of this one, because that's rather fascinating. He does, while it's not light therapy, Paracelsus definitely made links that have been substantiated in the modern world in regard to colour therapy. So it gets interesting, I consider, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be making this video. To me, it gets interesting in 1666 when Isaac Newton, and most people have heard of him because he obviously was a key figure in the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment period. Anybody that has heard the words gravity will actually know that that relates to his discoveries, if you like. He also is, one of his claims to fame is that he invented calculus, but he also invented what we call the colour spectrum, which we still use today, okay? So where I'm going with this is he created the colour spectrum based on light, okay? And this spectrum became the foundational theories for the science of optics that we still use today. And he states, or the records state, that he was influenced by theories of Aristotle, where all colours were derived from both white and black, and where they related to the elements of fire, water, earth, and air. Now, apparently the tests that he conducted as part of establishing his colour spectrum was to pass a beam of sunlight through a prism. And he observed that when the light came out of the prism, it wasn't white light anymore, but it became 7 different colours: the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, okay? The rainbow colours. And he called this colour change, if you like, to be dispersion, and it's from here that he created this colour spectrum. It all gets a bit complex for me, I must say, but from what I can gather, and you are invited to write your own comments up if you're a scientist, what happened was his experiments included, or they occurred actually, because he saw light coming through his window at a small point. So then he conducted some experiments making the space, the hole, making it wider or smaller, and allowing light to pass through this prism so that he could measure or whatever with the colours. And he had a couple of other learnings as well, is that when you bring the light, the coloured rays back through the prism, it turns back into white light. And if you only put one ray back through the prism, it would come out the same colour. So basically you could bring a rainbow through of colour, but if you only reflected one colour of the rainbow back through this prism, then it would retain its original colour. You know, so we're talking about red light staying red and blue being blue, etc., etc. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but clearly not in scientific detail, because frankly I'm not a scientist, absolutely not a scientist. Anyway, his work that he established or conducted, and that this has become breakthroughs, you know, that we still draw upon today. But what I find interesting, for me, the relevance of putting this slide in is not just that he created the colour spectrum, but the fact that within his tests, and because this is now acknowledged by the scientists to be true, what he found, he scientifically evidenced that there are 7 rays. Now, if we talk about this is in 1666. But all he's done is provide the evidence, this is the way I see it, to the Vedic texts that say you have 7 horses. That's how they described it. So he provided the scientific evidence to support religious texts, if you like. So there you go, 7 horses, 7 rays, proven. So in regard to finding evidence to support radiant light, nothing really happens, as you can see here, until somewhere between 1808 and 1891 with a gentleman by the name of Pleasanton. As you can see here, this is an image of him. Now, the reality was that he was just your average Joe. He'd fought in a war, he'd been relatively successful, and after the war, he just had an inquiring mind. And because he went into the field of farming, he started asking the questions, why was it that plants grew better in summer and not in winter? And he believed it was because the sky was blue. And so he then started doing tests. So what happened was, between the years of 1861 and 1876, he tested his theory that plants need to be exposed to blue light to be able to grow. So he built some greenhouses and he did his experiments on grapes. And in this greenhouse, he put alternating panes of glass, and some of them were blue and some of them were colourless. And he then published his results, or the findings, in a book called, what was it called? On the Influence, certainly a big title, on the influence of the blue colour of the sky in the developing animal and vegetable life. What a gobful. But anyway, he continued his experiments and expanding on his theories, and he wrote other books. And basically, he was of the position that blue light could arrest disease and restore health in acute and chronic disorders to human and domestic animals. And he was of the belief that you could use this blue light to eradicate disease, actually. So I'm just making the point that at the time, the article that I looked at that gave me this information said pseudoscientific and never adopted by mainstream scientists, even in his time. Well, I think we're going to look at this down the track, because actually his theories on the blue light have actually partially been proven in modern times, but we'll talk about that later. So I'm not sure if Pancoast and Pleasanton moved in the same circles, but either way they were both independently conducting their own research on the use of radiant light around about the same time. And Pancoast published his book on medicine in 1877. So just to be clear, Pancoast, he was a medical professional. He was a professor of, and this is his title, Professor of Microscopic Anatomy and Physiology at the Penn Medical University of Philadelphia. And now, within his research, he wrote medical books on the therapeutic benefits of the light spectrum. So to put this into perspective, he was a deeply religious man, as were many at the time. He was also a Quaker, but his, I suppose, religious belief was one that incorporated understandings of the Kabbalah, and it's recorded as being one that incorporated also inner light and the philosophies and theosophies of the ancient sages, with the purpose of educating readers on how to use coloured light for healing. Where he differed to Pleasanton was that he used all of the colours in the spectrum, and his treatments included what he referred to as a sunbath, where the patient had to lie and the sunlight would be applied to them through a coloured glass. And he said, based on his experiments, if you like, that the blue and the red rays were especially curative, and red rays were used to excite the nervous system, and blue had calming effects or to counter excessive excitement. And his books proved to be very influential to the early theosophists, which might be why we refer to colour therapy as New Age, because Helena Blavatsky, who's considered to be the grandmother of the New Age movement, she was apparently quite excited by his research, and she referred to it in one of her own books called Isis Unveiled. So his books ended up influencing a gentleman by the name of Edwin Babbitt and his use of coloured glass, and later they were to influence Dinshah Gadiali, who we talked about at the beginning of this video. Interestingly, you can still access books by Pancoast. They're available online in digital copies, and one is held at the Library of Congress in the US. I'm not sure if it can be downloaded for free, but you certainly would be able to find his books online. From the perspective of modern chromotherapists, Edwin Babbitt is considered to be the most important of all the early chromotherapists or light therapists. He, around about the same time frame as Pancoast and Pleasanton, he began to treat psycho-emotional disorders using chromotherapy or light therapy, but he also employed what is called magnetic therapy, and he was working out of New York. Now, he did several years of experimentation using light and colour, as I said, in the areas of healthcare, and he began publishing articles on his research. Now, what makes him stand out is he developed what is called the chroma lens, and the chroma lens he has described, because obviously he did advertising and promotion of his work. The chroma lens was a 5.5-inch piece of glass in diameter. It was made in the form of a double convex lens, and it was hollow, and it could hold about 8 ounces of liquid, right? The lenses were made of different colours, and when they were filled with water, it was his belief that by holding them 6 to 11 inches from light, they could be radiated. And from his perspective, the use of light and colour had two approaches to healing. You could use the light to do the radiation that could cure disease in his mind, that had this penetrating healing power, but you could also then drink the water that was inside of these convex lens as part of other healing, if you like, and in his belief it was more potent than any healing drug that you could use. He also developed what is called the Babbitt's lampshade, and one description I saw is the most simple, useful and beautiful thing of the kind ever devised. It says, it's a translucent paper covering of a graded blue tint, producing a soft blue light to soothe and strengthen the eye and nerves. That was how it was advertised and promoted. He passed away in 1908. The reason I'm mentioning this is because obviously at this point in time, when we talk about them promoting and advertising the colour and light therapy, it was not considered to have any evidence or substance to it. And this is where the pseudo-scientific belief comes into this whole theory of using colour light. However, we go a little further. Stick with it, because with this blue light, we do have scientific evidence in the last 2 years as to, well, I think it's 2 years, might be a little bit longer than that. I'll wait until I get to that slide, but yes, there is evidence around the healing properties of the blue light, but I'll carry on for now. The next really progressive person in regard to light therapy and chromotherapy is actually Dinshah, because Dinshah is the founder of chromotherapy as we know it today. Now, to put things into perspective, Dinshah was born of Persian descent in Bombay in India, or what was called Bombay at the time, in 1873. He was actually a genius, so I believe it's important to talk about his skill base and how he came to the conclusions that chromotherapy, which he called Spectochrome back in the day, was able to heal people. So in the first instance, let's just do some background here. At the age of 11, he became an assistant to the Professor of Mathematics and Science at Wilson College. He was awarded prizes for proficiency in English, Persian and religion, so obviously religion was important to him. By the age of 14, he finalised his exams at Bombay University, and he was said to be fluent in 8 Oriental and Occidental languages. I'm not sure what an Occidental language is, but there you go. He is reported by the Bioregulatory Medicine, which is a modern website, to be not only a genius, but a man totally devoted to the selfless duty of healing others. From a genius perspective, he actually did start school at the age of 2.5, which is why by the age of 8 he had started this avid interest in chemistry and mathematics. So then we see him graduating at the age of 14 with proficiency in chemistry and physics, and he began studies in medicine. So by 1891, what happened was he encountered, it doesn't say who, but it says the Theosophical Society. I would presume it was probably Annie Besant, who was living in India at the time, and this is when his interest in spirituality started, if you like, and he started studying with a Hindu neighbour, and he became a student of a guru called Swami, pronunciation may be incorrect, Murdan Shastri. Now from there in 1892, so we would presume because of his studies with this guru that he was exposed to what was called the 7 horses, the exposure to the Theosophical Society. He would have been exposed to the theories of Pancoast. In 1892, he designed and built several electric light installations, so he learned the technology, if you like, for building and construction of these items. In 1893, he started working as an electrical engineer on a ship or whatever with the Oriental Steamship Company, and he commenced travels, and he went to London, presumably to the US. In 1896, he went to the United States for the first time, and he actually met with Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. So I find that fascinating, because clearly they were prominent scientists that we're still aware of today, and they were groundbreaking. Apparently there's an article in the New York Times where they refer to him as Parsi Edison. So in 1897, he started using chromotherapy techniques that he'd learned from Babbitt, but instead he adapted his approach to having coloured glass, and he was using kerosene lamps to create the light for healing to pass through these colours. And he is said to have successfully treated a niece for colitis that wasn't responding to other treatments by the medical professionals. He went to the US in 1908, he became a citizen of the US in 1917, and his previous medical credentials weren't recognised there. In 1919, he became vice president of the Drugless Medical Society, and in 1920, he was considered to have perfected chromotherapy, as we call it now, except that he called it Spectochrome. In 1931, he started battling with the government to be able to practice his drugless therapies and Spectochrome, and this became an enduring battle for him over the next 35 years until he passed away. And it's alleged in his supporters that his problems lay with the birth of Big Pharma. So I've included this image here because this is actually one of Dinshah's, and it refers to the types of colour that he uses. He didn't just use the primary colours. He obviously developed healing techniques and strategies that incorporated hues of primary colours as well. So that might include using, if you're talking about the colour lenses and the lamps, that might include using one or two different colours at a specific time to treat a specific ailment. So we'll have a look at what he positioned to be the benefits of the use of light. So on this slide, we're looking at basically the treatment recommendations chart, and we can look at here and see what he positioned were the benefits of the use of light and colour on any particular part of the body. Now, my questions would be, I'm not sure how anybody that might start using chromotherapy today might be able to do a diagnosis. I think that would be a bit risky unless we've got medical qualifications. Potentially it was different for Dinshah because he was actually a qualified medical professional, even if he wasn't qualified to work in the US. He certainly had medical background there. I also need to point out that there's nothing to support that these treatments might be relevant in modern times, and to be quite honest, I think even if it was proven that the colours weren't helpful for certain conditions, to me that's perfectly fine. We're talking about a man who did his studies over 100 years ago, and if we look at modern science today, certainly within my lifetime, the more tests that are conducted, the more previous knowledge becomes disproved. However, the truth of stuff is that information that remains valid after trialling and testing over the years. And over the decades, there is some truth to how these colours are supposed to work. For example, I'm not going to go too far into it now. When we look at this colour turquoise here, it's said, Dinshah's saying that's supposed to be a skin builder, and have associations with that. I'm not sure about that. If we look at the indigo, that's supposed to work upon the immune system. That may have relevance when we get to the next slides, okay? But either way, this was his suggestions back in the 1920s. So 1920s, 1908, I'm not sure, round about that time frame. So where I'm going with this is you could actually, if you wanted to be open-minded, try and test this in conjunction with your own medical treatments. I wouldn't stop doing it. What else can I say? Not a lot here, not a lot on this. Let's take a look at the next slide. So just to be clear, there seems to be a lot of conflicting information on the internet about how you would use colour healing properties, and that includes light therapy and radiant light. So on this particular page, what we're looking at is somebody else's position. I'm not sure, I can't remember now if this came from Dinshah's website or if it's from somewhere else, but these are said to be healing properties associated with specific colours, and they do have relevance going forward in the next slides, because some of it seems to be backed up with modern evidence and some doesn't. So these are just some of the ways that we've advanced with light and light theory into the 21st century. And I mean, some of these developments have obviously occurred after Dinshah has died in the 20th century as well. Now we actually recognise that there are things that you can do with light that they wouldn't have known about back then. You have the cutting laser beams, you can do eye surgery, we have light, the UV light in the humidicribs. Interestingly, they don't treat jaundice the way that Dinshah would have recommended. I want to make a specific note here of these images in that the image up the top on the right, this is what is now called a modern chromotherapy bed, and the way they actually would deliver chromotherapy treatments. And just to be clear, there is nothing to say that these are actually effective for treating physical illness, but my understanding and hearing people's feedback is that it certainly, from a psycho-emotional perspective, actually helps people to feel really good if they go on those beds. But it's the coloured light that passes through crystals on these beds, and basically the person is incubated. They have all their other senses cut off while they're exposed to this light therapy. So the feedback is very positive, but it's positive around psycho-emotional, okay? Just need to be very clear about that. The other thing that looks a bit like a bidet or a toilet that's underneath that, that's actually a float tank, and it was the best image that I could get. It's called a pod, and basically they're filled with water, and the person gets in there, they immerse themselves into it, they pull the lid down, and then they have a total sensory deprivation occur with them while they're in this pod, and then they're exposed to coloured light while they're in the pod. Now, I actually have tried this out, and from my perspective, it's very relaxing, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so definitely on a psycho-emotional level, I would say that it's good. However, from a physiological perspective, I don't think there's enough research behind it, but I have heard that elite athletes who've experienced physical injuries, they actually have been prescribed treatment with these flotation pods. And I do recall seeing an article where one elite athlete has said that they credited these pods with actually helping them to recover from their muscular injury. So that's just a little bit of interest there. Now, the reason why I have talked about the blue light is because when we talk about light therapy, this UVO sterilisation lamp in the centre, the blue one, this is what's come to my attention in more recent times. And I have to admit, I'm very, very shocked by it, because I saw it come up being advertised as able to disinfect and as a sterilisation lamp, because obviously that's what it's called. I, like everybody else, was thinking, is this a scam? It sounds like a scam. What I did see, so I think it would be careful if you're going to, or it would be wise to be cautious if you're going to buy one of these, because apparently the feedback is, no, it is proven. They are proven to be effective. However, the radiant light needs to be at a certain rate for these sterilisation lamps to be effective. Now, what I didn't know until I saw this advertised and did my own research on it is that these are being promoted because it has been proven in more recent times, it has to be recent, because it has capacity to kill the COVID virus, other human coronaviruses, influenza, I meant actually, and drug-resistant bacteria. And it is said to be a practical method of preventing indoor disease transmission, and will be equally good at inactivating all future COVID variants, as well as new infectious viruses that have yet to emerge, and also protecting against the old-fashioned ones like measles. So, I mean, that is absolutely mind-blowing. But as I say, if you're going to purchase one, it needs to have the correct levels of light. Now, what I did see is that this is not necessarily a new thing. It's just been tested in more recent times since COVID as being effective to kill these viral or whatever you want to call it. But apparently airlines have been using these lamps to actually sterilise the airline seats probably for decades. So they have known that light therapy works. And if I recall, somewhere along the way, one of these people, it might have been Babbitt, could have been Babbitt, that said that the blue light was good for sterilising. Maybe it was Pleasanton. But anyway, just a bit of food for thought. As science progresses, it actually seems to confirm the theories of the 7 horses. Obviously, we still have to, I guess there's been a lot of knowledge that's been lost along the way as to what are the best ways to use light. So I still recommend approach with caution, but it's interesting. So other advances also include Kirlian Photography, and I think the relevance for me to include this in here is because it provides evidence from my perspective about what we talk about light bodies, that everybody's got a light body, and this is why healing with light actually works, because it balances out our personal and individual light bodies. So what is interesting for me is, yes, okay, we know that these cameras can take photographs of what we call the aura. However, there is still this mainstream, I've got to point this out, there is still this mainstream scientific belief that it is not the aura. And I had to laugh, okay, because it all comes down to a person's understanding of what we're talking about. So basically, the idea of this camera is it takes photographs of the electric around a human. Okay, so when we talk about auras, we talk about them as having a speed, a rate, a vibration, yes, electricity. We talk about positives, negatives, polarities of the aura and that kind of thing. So what this camera is said to do is to take photographs of electric arcing, if you like, or the sparks that are created. One description I saw is that if you run electricity through the air quickly enough, then the air will glow. So this is where it all gets a little bit complex for me, okay, because I'm not a scientist. Please put your comments up. What I did read, and the part that I feel is humorous, because that's probably wrong, but whatever, it is what it is. Some scientists attempted to dispel the myth that Kirlian photography is not about auras, because it has the capacity to, well, in his opinion, he said people make claims that the aura is a person's soul and that the camera can take photographs of inanimate objects, such as we see over on the right, which is coins. So he's like, it's a myth. We can't say that it's taking photographs of the aura. It's an electrical combined with water, technical science explanation. So it's energy, electricity, light and vibration that is being photographed, according to him. Please do your own research on this. As I say, it's just too complex for me. Where I look at it though, because I think my brain has this capacity to just go, boom, there's a very interesting explanation there, which is he's actually just, from my perspective, confirmed that he doesn't actually understand what we mean when we talk about the aura. So for somebody like me who is into energy and who is into auras, what he's done is confirmed to me that my beliefs are that when we look at the aura, we're looking at the light body. We're not looking at the soul, because the light body can shrink and contract and expand, and it does so on a daily basis depending on what we're actually exposed to. And these cameras can actually take photographs of people and changes in the aura throughout the day. So if you took a photo at, say, 6 a.m. and then you took another photo later on in the day, you're going to see variations with the aura. It's not always going to be the same colour. So where I'm going with this is science quite often confirms religious, spiritual beliefs or energy beliefs while they are still in denial, I guess. And as far as it being able to take photographs of inanimate objects like the coin, well, I think people that are into energy and light bodies and stuff like that, we say everything's got a light body to it, you know, so it makes sense to us. An inanimate object has got an aura, the coins have got an aura, rocks have got an aura, you know, everything has got light around it. So to us, it's not actually implausible, but to the scientists it is. And I think it's because of the differences of language, the use of words, and not just with the scientists. If somebody is referring to an aura as the soul, that's their use of word. For somebody like me, I don't see the aura as being the soul. I see the aura as being the light body, and the soul is the divine spark. And if we wanted to get into that, the soul is the namaste. When people talk about namaste, I see the spark, I see the divine in you. That's different. Okay, so it's different to the actual light body or the aura. So I'm going to wind this video up just basically saying there's different methods that we can in modern times use to bring or to incorporate light and colour healing, if I can speak, even if it's just for mood, for our psychosocial well-being. We can do the things like the coloured candle holders and coloured glass windows. We can do the keep items in glass bottles. And from my perspective, I actually was reminded through the process of making this video that I actually really love coloured Himalayan lamps. So I've actually gone out and bought one because mine died a long time ago. They definitely do have a feel-good quality about them, so I don't hesitate to recommend them. Other suggestions are that you can use coloured candle holders. Now, just a reminder that when it comes to one of the treatments that involves bottles and fluids, that included putting the fluid. For instance, Dinshah treated his niece's colitis by putting milk into coloured glass, radiating it and giving it to her about 10 times a day or something like that to cure her colitis. I'm not sure, because I live in Australia, I'm not sure how comfortable I would be to having milk exposed to sunlight because it goes sour so quickly. But there is the method of charged and solarized water that is recommended by people. And with this method, people would get the coloured bottle, which should be sterilised and filled to 3/4 with distilled water. Bottles should be capped or corked and then placed in bright sunlight for 3 to 4 hours. This is the recommendation because that's apparently what's needed, allegedly, to acquire the medicinal properties. And then the recommendation comes from there that can actually be digested if people want to drink it, or you can actually cleanse wounds on your skin with this coloured light, or to different parts of the body. It can be applied as a compress, each to their own. I'd be interested to know people's experience trying this test out. So when it comes to Aurasoma, even they thankfully say that they're not necessarily associated with chromotherapy, although it is linked together. It's kind of a treatment that leaps between a whole heap of different modalities, and this is why I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it here. Although it draws upon colour with the bottles, I think it's you just wouldn't say that it's got very much at all in common with Spectochrome or radiant light therapy in itself. But it's worth a mention here. I might actually do a separate video to talk about it. It was actually devised in 1983, and while I think there would be benefit for it, I would probably use it myself, but I just wouldn't include it as being light therapy. I would use it more sort of for psycho-emotional diagnosis, self-awareness actually. So not within a clinical setting. I would actually have the person do their own self-awareness stuff, but each to their own. The other way of using radiant therapy, which I think is not really evidence-based, it might be, but, as I say, please put your own comments up. It's coloured eyeglasses and lenses, and it's positioned that the wearer of the coloured glasses or the lens, that colour enters the person's eyes and it reaches the endocrinal, if that's how you pronounce the word, glands, and it causes changes at the hormonal and cellular level. Look, I'm not sure about that, but what I will say is I do remember, I think it was back in the 90s, that they were using coloured glasses as part of treating things like dyslexia, and that was supposed to have success. I haven't looked at research on it since or in more recent times, but that might be an activity for perhaps sometime in the future. In the meantime, if you've got information, once again, I invite you to put your comments up, because this is all about sharing information and for us all to learn from each other and grow and develop ourselves. So, my friends, that's all I can give you today in regard to light therapy or radiant colour therapy, or whatever name we like to apply to this. I hope you found it interesting. I definitely found it interesting, and I hope I'm able to deliver it to you in a way that it doesn't bore you senseless. I know this is a long video. I do encourage you, with some of my longer videos at least, just pause them and stop and start and come back to them when it suits you, because that's why I put the links in the bottom. I just find it really difficult to do justice to a subject if I don't actually go into it in a certain amount of detail. But anyway, for now, my friends, I'm going to leave you. So thank you very much once again for being part of my journey. I will catch you on the next video. Have a wonderful day, wonderful week. See you soon. Bye-bye for now.